I've been thinking, especially about our conversation the other night, you know, about starting a family. Martins raised an eyebrow, still skeptical about Philip's sudden interest in fatherhood. Yeah, I remember. What about it? Philip leaned forward, his voice filled with confidence. I've made up my mind. I want a child. But here's the thing, I don't want to get married. Once upon a time, in a bustling city filled with skyscrapers and the constant hum of business, there lived a man named Philip. He was the definition of success, handsome, intelligent, and incredibly wealthy. He owned one of the largest companies in the city, and with it came all the luxuries a person could ever dream of. Philip's life seemed perfect from the outside. His mansion was nothing short of a palace, complete with marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled with diamonds, and sprawled gardens that could easily be mistaken for a park. His garage housed some of the most expensive cars, and his closet was filled with designer suits. People admired Philip wherever he went. Businessmen wanted to be him, and women wanted to be with him, and the media couldn't get enough of his success story. Yet, despite all this admiration, Philip felt an emptiness inside of him. He had everything material wealth could offer, but his life lacked one thing: family. His best friend Martins often teased him about it. Martins was also a successful businessman, though not as wealthy as Philip. Still, their friendship had lasted through the years, and they often found themselves having deep conversations about life, ambition, and the future. One evening, as usual, they sat in their favorite bar, a sleek high-end lounge where city's elites often gathered. Martins leaned back in his chair, a playful grin on his face. "Philip, my friend," Martins began, his voice filled with teasing tone. Philip knew him too well to tease him often. "You've got it all: a mansion, cars, and a business empire. But you know what's missing?" Philip raised his eyebrow, already knowing where this conversation was headed. "What am I missing, Martins? Another trip to a tropical paradise, or another car, or a mansion?" "No," Martins chuckled. "You are missing the most important thing: a wife and children. Who is going to inherit your empire when you are gone? Who are you going to share all of this wealth with? You need a family." Philip laughed, though the comment struck the chord. "Marriage isn't for me, Martins. I've never been the type to settle down, and I definitely haven't found a woman worth changing that for." "Come on, Philip," Martins pressed, leaning forward. "You don't want to grow old alone in that big mansion of yours, do you? Imagine it, coming home to a family, kids running around, someone to share your life with. It's not all about business, you know." Philip smiled, but he waved the thought away. "I'm fine as I am. No strings attached, no obligations." Martin sighed, shaking his head in amusement. "Alright, keep telling yourself that, but one day you will realize that money and success aren't everything." Though they laughed and continued their evening as usual, Martin's word lingered in Philip's mind long after they left the bar. That night, as Philip lay in his enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing in his life. He had all the wealth, the power, and everything anyone could want. But when he thought about the future, there was no one there to share it with, no one to carry on his legacy. The thought gnawed at him. For the first time, Philip allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have a child. Not a wife. He was still certain that marriage wasn't for him, but a child, someone who could inherit everything he had worked for, someone who would bear his name and continue his legacy long after he was gone. By morning, Philip had made his mind up. As he sat in his kitchen sipping his morning coffee and looking out over the city skyline, he realized what he wanted. He didn't need a wife, but he did want a child. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. A child would give him a sense of purpose beyond his business, a reason to come home at night that wasn't tied to the next big deal or corporate success. The next day, at work, Philip couldn't shake the growing excitement inside of him. The idea of becoming a father, of having a child to carry on his name, was all he could think about. His thoughts raced as he considered the possibilities, the responsibilities, and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Feeling an urgent need to share his plan with someone, He picked up the phone and called Martins, his best friend. Martins, please, can you come to my office as soon as you can? Philip said, barely containing his enthusiasm. Within few minutes, Martins arrived, curious as to why Philip seemed so energized. What's going on, Philip? You sounded urgent. Philip leaned back in his chair, smiling. So I've been thinking, especially about our conversation the other night. You know, about starting a family. Martins raised an eyebrow, still skeptical about Philip's sudden interest in fatherhood. Yeah, I remember. What about it? Philip leaned forward, his voice filled with confidence. I've made up my mind. I want a child. But here's the thing. I don't want to get married. I've been researching surrogacy and sperm donation, and it seems like the perfect solution. No strings attached, no complications with the partner, just me and my child. Martin stared in disbelief. Wait, are you serious? You're really considering this? Absolutely, Philip replied, nodding firmly. I can have everything I've ever wanted, my own child, my legacy without the challenges that come with a marriage or long-term relationship is the best of both worlds. Martin folded his arms, leaning against the edge of the desk. Philip, I know you're excited, but having a child is a huge responsibility. It's not like making a business deal where you sign papers and move on. You'll be raising a human being, dealing with diapers, school runs, sleepless nights, and everything else that comes with being a parent. Philip smiled, clearly unfazed. I've thought about that too, and I'm ready for the responsibilities, Martins. I know it's not going to be easy, but this is something I really want. Martin sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, Philip, but maybe take a little more time to think it through. You're diving headfirst into this. Philip gave his friend a reassuring look. I will, Martins. I will take my time to plan everything carefully, but this feels right. I know I'm ready. Satisfied that Philip had at least considered the weight of his decision, Martins nodded. Alright, if you are sure, just make sure you do your research and talk to professionals about it. Later that evening, after a busy day at work, Philip went home feeling good about the future. He couldn't wait to move forward with his plan. However, as soon as he walked through the door of his spacious mansion, he was greeted by an unexpected surprise. His mother, whom he had given a spare key, was sitting comfortably in his living room, but she wasn't alone. Seated beside her was a young woman, dressed elegantly, her eyes bright with expectation. Philip instantly felt a knot from his stomach. He had had a bad feeling about it. Mom, what are you doing here? Philip asked, trying to keep his tone light, though confusion and concern were creeping into his voice. His mother stood up with a proud smile and gestured to the woman next to her. Philip, I wanted to introduce you to someone very special. This is Lara, the daughter of my very good friend. Isn't she beautiful? Philip's heart sank. He knew exactly where this was going, and it was the last thing he wanted. Mom, he began, trying to stay calm. What's going on here? Why is she here? His mother's eyes twinkled as she ignored his obvious discomfort. Lara is a wonderful young woman, Philip. She is smart, polite, and comes from a great family. I think you two would be perfect for each other. Philip could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The last thing he wanted was an arranged relationship, especially not now when he was so focused on his own plans. Mom, you can't just bring someone into my life like this. I told you, I am not interested. His mother waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense, Philip. You're not getting any younger. I've waited long enough for you to settle down, and Lara is the perfect match for you. Just spend some time with her and see how you will feel. Lara, who had been sitting quietly throughout the conversation, gave Philip a shy smile, clearly aware of the tension but also eager to please. Philip forced a polite smile in return, but felt trapped. He didn't want to hurt Lara's feelings, but he also couldn't stand the thought of being pushed into something he had no interest in. Mom, I really don't think this is a good idea, Philip said firmly, trying to maintain his composure. His mother, however, wasn't backing down. Philip, just give it a chance. Lara is staying with us for a while. I think you'll see that she's exactly what you need. Feeling suffocated, Philip knew he needed to get out of the house before the situation escalated. I need some hair, he muttered, grabbing his keys and heading towards the door. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, Philip felt a mixture of frustration and confusion. This wasn't what he wanted. He had his own plan for fatherhood, and it didn't involve being set up by his mother. He needed to figure out how to handle the situation with Lara without causing more tension with his family. Later that evening, he met up with Martins in their usual spot, eager to vent about the situation. "You won't believe what just happened," Philip said as he slid into the booth across from Martins. Martins raised an eyebrow. Intrigued. "What again?" Philip sighed, rubbing his temples. "My mom brought a woman to my house, her friend's daughter. She expects me to marry her." Martins burst out laughing, unable to contain his amusement. "Seriously? Your mom set you up?" Philip groaned. "It's not funny, Martins. I'm already dealing with enough, trying to figure out how to have a child, and now my mom's pressuring me to get married." Martins chuckled, shaking his head. "Mothers, they always think they know best, don't they?" Philip leaned back, frustration etched on his face. "I don't know what to do. I don't want to hurt Lara's feelings, but I can't let my mom push me into this." After a moment, Martin's laughter faded, and he grew thoughtful. "You know, maybe there's a way to turn this situation to your personal advantage." Philip looked at him skeptically. "What do you mean?" Martins leaned forward with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Why not consider using Lara as a surrogate?" Martin's eyes widened in disbelief. "Martins, are you crazy? I can't do that. She's not someone I want to be tied to like that." Martins shrugged. "Just a thought, but you're right, it's a messy situation." Philip shook his head, knowing that his path to fatherhood was becoming more complicated by the day. He had no idea how to move forward without disappointing his mother or compromising his own desires. Over the next few days, Lara made herself increasingly comfortable in Philip's home, ignoring his subtle protests and avoiding any direct confrontation with him. She moved through the house like it was her own, constantly finding ways to insert herself into his daily routine. Whether it was preparing meals, tidying up the house, or dressing in a way that was impossible to ignore, Lara's goal was clear. She wanted Philip's attention, and she was determined to get it. Every evening, as Philip sat down for dinner with his mother, she would casually bring up Lara's effort, further adding to his growing frustration. "Philip, isn't this meal just wonderful? Lara made it herself," his mother would say proudly, as if Lara had done something miraculous. Philip, who was already irritated by the whole situation, would force a tight smile and nod. "Yes, it's fine, Mom," he would reply, doing his best just to remain polite. In reality, the more his mother praised Lara's cooking and household contributions, the more Philip began to feel like a stranger in his own home. It wasn't just the meals. Lara's attempts to play the role of a dutiful partner extended far beyond the dinner table. Her efforts to impress Philip didn't stop with the meals. She would go out of her way to ensure she was always nearby, often dressed in revealing outfits, hoping to catch his eyes. Whether she was cleaning the living room or bringing him a glass of water, her motives were clear. One evening, after an especially long day at work, Philip came home exhausted, hoping to spend some quiet time in his office home. But just as he settled into the chair and opened his laptop, there was a soft knock at the door. Lara entered the room, holding a tray of food. "I noticed you didn't eat dinner tonight," she said sweetly. "I thought you might be hungry, so I brought you something." Philip looked up, his weariness now compounded by frustration. He appreciated that she had gone to the trouble, but her persistence was starting to wear him off. He sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. "Lara, I appreciate the gesture, but I need you to understand something." His tone was firm but not unkind. "I am not interested. I am not ready for a relationship, and this, whatever you're trying to do, is not what I want." Lara didn't appear discouraged. In fact, she flashed him a soft, confident smile as she placed the tray on his desk in front of him. "You will see, Philip. In time, you will realize that I am perfect for you." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Philip both baffled and irritated. That night, unable to focus on his work, Philip called his best friend Martins to vent his frustrations. "This is getting completely out of hand," Philip said. pacing around in his home office as he spoke. Lara just won't give up. She's constantly hovering, always trying to impress me, and my mother is no help at all. She refuses to let her leave. I don't know how to get rid of her without upsetting my mom. Martins laughed on the other end of the line, clearly finding the whole situation amusing. It sounds like something out of a soap opera, but you have to admit she's determined. Philip groaned. This isn't funny, Martins. It's driving me crazy. I can't even relax in my own home anymore. After a moment of silence, Martin spoke again. You know, Philip, maybe there is a way to turn this situation around. Philip raised an eyebrow, even though Martins couldn't see him. What do you mean? He asked wearily, already sensing that whatever Martins was about to say might just be unorthodox. Well, Martins began, you've been talking about wanting a child without the hassle of marriage, right? Martins continued, why not just consider using her? Just consider using her as your own surrogate. Philip froze. Are you out of your mind? Stop bringing up this suggestion. This is the second time you're mentioning it. I don't find it funny. Martins, she's not fit to carry my child. I don't even know her that well. And she's not someone I want to be tied up with for the rest of my life. Don't bring up this suggestion. Martins chuckled, clearly amused by Philip's reactions. Okay, I was just throwing the idea out there. I just think you will buy it for the second time. Philip shook his head. No way. That's not happening. I need to stick to my original plan. I'm going to find a proper surrogate, someone who knows the terms of the arrangement and won't complicate things for me. Fair enough, Martin said, his tone more serious now. In that case, I think it's time you move forward with your plan. The longer you let the situation with Lara drag out, the messier it's going to get. Philip sighed. You're right. I can't keep letting my mom push Lara onto me. I need to take some control of this situation, and fast. Determined to take control of his future, Philip made an appointment at a reputable fertility clinic to explore his options for surrogacy. The clinic had a solid reputation, and Philip was confident that this was the right path to fulfill his dream of becoming a father. When Philip arrived at the clinic, he was greeted by a friendly nurse who guided him through the process. He sat down with Dr. Lawson, a fertility specialist, who patiently explained the various options available to him. They discussed the pros and cons of surrogacy, the steps involved, and what Philip could expect during the entire process. Surrogacy is a big commitment, Philip, Dr. Lawson said, handing him a folder filled with the detailed information. It's important to find the right surrogate, someone who is both physically and mentally prepared to carry a child. Philip nodded. I understand. I want to make sure everything is done right. This child would be my legacy. Dr. Lawson assured him that the clinic would handle all of the legal and medical aspects of the process. The next step was to meet potential surrogates, and Philip felt a surge of excitement as the journey began. A few weeks later, the clinic introduced Philip to Jane, a bright and kind young woman who had previously been a surrogate. From their first meeting, Philip knew that Jane was the right choice. She was calm, very well spoken, and understood the responsibilities that came with surrogacy. Once all the necessary paperwork was signed, the surrogacy journey officially began. Philip wanted to ensure that Jane was well taken care of during the pregnancy. He spared no expense, renting a beautiful apartment with a personal chef and a housekeeper to make her life easier. He wanted to make sure that both Jane and the baby had the best care possible. Philip made it a point to check in on Jane regularly, visiting her apartment at least 3 times in a week to see how she was doing and to discuss the pregnancy. At first, Jane appreciated his attention to detail and the effort he was putting into it to ensure her comfort. He brought her groceries, asked about her doctor's appointment, and made sure the apartment had everything she needed. However, after a few months, Jane began to feel a little overwhelmed by Philip's constant presence. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate his concern, it was just that Philip was becoming overbearing. Every time she turned around, there he was, asking if she needed anything, bringing her more supplies, or insisting on staying for dinner. One afternoon, after another well-meaning visit from Philip, Jane decided to address the issue. As they sat together in the living room, Jane looked at him kindly and said, Philip, I appreciate everything you're doing, but I think it's important for me to have some space. This is my job and I know how to take care of myself. Philip paused, taken aback. He didn't realize how much his constant checking in might be affecting her. He thought he was doing the right thing, but now he could see that he might have been a little too hands on. I'm sorry, Jane, Philip said after a moment. I didn't mean to overstep. I guess I've just been so excited about becoming a father, and I didn't think about how my actions were affecting you. Jane smiled warmly. I understand, and I know this is important to you. But don't worry, the pregnancy is going well, and everything is on track. I just need a little breathing room. That's all. Relieved by the conversation, Philip promised to back off and give Jane the space she needed. He still cared deeply about the well-being of his future child, but he realized that hovering over Jane wouldn't make the process any easier for either of them. From that point on, Philip made an effort to balance his involvement. He continued to check in, but less frequently, allowing Jane to handle the pregnancy in her own way. He still ensured she had everything she needed, but he trusted her to reach out if there was something more required. As the months passed, Philip's excitement about becoming a father continued to grow. He began preparing the nursery in his mansion, carefully selecting everything from the crib to the tiny outfits for his future child. He also started researching parenting books and even attended a few parenting classes, wanting to be ready as possible for this new chapter of his life. Months passed, and as Jane's pregnancy progressed, Philip became more anxious and excited. He spent hours preparing for the arrival of his son, ensuring everything was perfect. He wanted to be ready for fatherhood in every way possible. Then the day finally came. It was a calm Saturday morning when Philip received a phone call from Jane, her voice shaky yet composed. Philip, I think it's time. I'm in labor, she said. Philip's heart immediately began to race. I'll be there in a minute, he said, grabbing his keys and rushing out of the house without another thought. The drive to the hospital felt like the longest journey of his life. Every red light, every slow-moving car seemed like an eternity, but eventually he arrived, breathless and eager. When Philip reached the hospital room, Jane was already deep in labor, surrounded by doctors and nurses. She was calm but visibly exhausted. Philip stood by her side, offering words of encouragement even though he could feel the overwhelming tension in the air. After a few hours of labor, cries filled the room as Jane gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The nurse carefully placed the newborn into Philip's arms, and in that moment, the world seemed to stop. He looked down at his son with wide eyes and pounding heart. The tiny baby, wrapped snugly in a blanket, had the softest features and a small tuft of dark hairs. Tears welled up in Philip's eyes as he held his son for the first time. Brian, Philip whispered softly, naming him right there in the moment. It was a name that he had chosen months ago, a name that symbolized strength and resilience, everything Philip wanted his son to embody. The surge of love Philip felt was overwhelming. He had accomplished so much in life, but nothing compared to this. Holding his son, feeling his soft breath and tiny hands was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just pride, it was pure, unfiltered love, the kind that made his heart swell. Martins was one of the first to arrive at the hospital, his face lighting up the moment he saw the baby. He had never seen Philip so emotional, and he couldn't help but tease him a little. Look at you, man, Martin said, clapping him on the back. All this success and wealth, and now you're a father. You finally did it, Philip. Congratulations. Philip smiled, his eyes still on Brian. Thanks, Martins. I can't believe he's finally here. But as the excitement of the day started to fade, the reality of fatherhood began to set in. As the doctors and nurses prepared Jane for discharge, Philip realized that he would soon be taking care of Brian, home alone. Jane had fulfilled her role as a surrogate, and though she had deeply cared about ensuring the baby was healthy, she made it clear that her journey with Brian was complete. The first few weeks after Brian's birth were some of the hardest Philip had faced. He had entered fatherhood with excitement, but the reality was much more overwhelming than he had imagined. Brian cried at all hours of the night, refusing to sleep for more than a couple of hours at a time. Philip was constantly exhausted, trying to meet the demands of his newborn while balancing his responsibilities at work. Every morning, Philip dragged himself out of bed, already drained from the sleepless nights. He had always prided himself on his ability to manage anything that life threw at him, but caring for Brian was unlike anything he had ever dealt with. The constant feedings, diaper changes, and soothing attempts left him frazzled, and his patience wore thin. Despite his love for Brian, Philip quickly realized that he couldn't manage everything on his own. Running a successful company and being a single father to a newborn was an impossible task, even for someone as capable as him. His business began to suffer as he spent less time at the office, and his employees started to notice his absence. One afternoon, after another particularly challenging day, Philip made a difficult decision. He packed a bag with Brian's essentials and drove to his mother's house. He knew he needed help, and if there was anyone who could provide the support he needed, it was her. When Philip arrived, his mother greeted him with a warm smile. "Oh, Philip, I've been waiting for this day," she said gently, taking Brian into her arms. Her eyes softened as she looked at her grandson, cuddling him lovingly. "He's perfect. You've done a wonderful job so far, but raising a child isn't something you can do alone." Philip sank into the sofa, exhausted. "I know, Mom. It's been harder than I expected. I can't seem to get any sleep, and I am falling behind at work. I don't know what to do anymore." His mother rocked Brian gently, her expression thoughtful. "Philip, I've been meaning to talk to you about something important," she said softly. "A baby needs his mother, or at least his mother's milk. It's vital for his health." Philip frowned. "Mom, Jane was just the surrogate. She's not part of our lives anymore." His mother shook her head, her voice firm but caring. "I understand that, Philip, but you have to think about what's best for your son, Brian. He needs proper nutrition, and there is only so much formula can do. Jane may have been the surrogate, but she's still the one who carried him for 9 months. You need to consider bringing her back into Brian's life, at least for a short while." Philip hesitated, torn between his desire to do what was best for his son and his reluctance to involve Jane any further. He had always seen her role as temporary, a business arrangement that ended the moment Brian was born. But as he watched his mother care for Brian, he began to realize that his mother might be right. "I just don't know if Jane would ever be willing to come back," Philip admitted, running a hand through his hair. She seemed eager to move on after the birth. His mother gave him a sympathetic smile. "You'll never know unless you try. You're a good father, Philip, but being a parent means asking for help when you need it. There is no shame in that." Philip sat quietly, weighing his options. He knew his mother was speaking from experience, and the idea of reaching out to Jane began to take root in his mind. He had to do what was best for Brian, even if it meant reopening a chapter he thought was closed. After much deliberation, Philip decided to contact the clinic again. He wasn't sure how Jane would react, but he knew he had to at least try. The next day, he called the clinic and explained the situation, hoping they could facilitate communication with Jane. A few days later, Philip received a call from the clinic. He had spoken to Jane, and she had agreed to meet with him. Relief washed over Philip as he set up a meeting, unsure of what to expect, but grateful that Jane was willing to talk. When the day of the meeting arrived, Philip sat nervously, waiting for Jane's arrival. His thoughts raced, wondering how she would react and whether she would agree to help. When Jane finally walked through the door, Philip stood up, greeting her with a warm yet anxious smile. "Thank you for meeting me, Jane," Philip said as she sat down. Jane gave him a small understanding smile. "Of course, Philip. I was surprised to hear from you, but I understand that this is about Brian." Philip nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, it is. It is about Brian. He's healthy, but my mother thinks he needs his mother's milk, at least for a while. I don't want to disrupt your life, but I was hoping you might consider helping him." Jane listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. She paused for a moment, clearly weighing her own feelings. "I never imagined I'll be involved after the birth," she admitted, "but I care about Brian's well-being. And if this is what is best for him, I am willing to help." Philip felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Jane. This means a lot to me and to Brian." With Jane's agreement, they worked out a plan for her to provide breast milk for Brian, allowing him to get the nutrition he needed, whilst maintaining the boundaries they had originally agreed upon. The first few days were a bit awkward. Jane had her own space in the house, but her primary focus was Brian. She took over feeding him, soothing his cries and establishing a routine that Philip and his mother had struggled to create. Philip, observing from a distance, was astonished by how easily she connected with Brian, calming him in ways he couldn't. Philip's mother was equally impressed and relieved. "Jane is such a blessing," she remarked one evening after dinner, watching Jane gently rock Brian to sleep in his nursery. "You made the right decision, Philip." Philip nodded, feeling a growing sense of gratitude. "I know, Mom. She's been incredible." As the days turned into weeks, Philip found himself spending more time with Jane and Brian. He started to notice things about Jane that he hadn't paid attention to before. She was not only patient with Brian, but she was also gentle and thoughtful in her interactions with everyone in the house. Despite her initial reluctance, Jane poured her heart into caring for Brian, as if he were her own. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Philip came home to find Jane and Brian in the living room. Brian was nestled against Jane's chest, fast asleep, while she quietly hummed a lullaby. The sight said something in Philip that he hadn't expected. Admiration, yes, but also something deeper. "You are amazing with him," Philip said softly, as he sat down beside her. Jane smiled, looking down at Brian. "He's a good baby, he just needed a bit of stability." Philip watched her for a moment, then asked, "How are you adjusting to being back?" Jane hesitated before answering. "It's been, well, easier than I thought. I didn't expect to feel this connected to him again, but it's hard not to care for him, you know." Philip nodded. "I never wanted to complicate your life, Jane. I just didn't realize how much Brian needed you." Jane gave a smile. "I'm glad I can help, but I need to be clear, Philip. I'm here for Brian, not for any other reason. I still have plans to leave once he's settled." Philip felt a pang of disappointment, but quickly hid it. "Of course, I understand." As Jane continued to care for Brian, Philip's feelings for her began to grow. It wasn't just about her kindness or her nurturing nature. There was something about the way she carried herself, her quiet strength that drew him in. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, whether they were about Brian or something completely unrelated. One evening, Philip's mother hosted a small family dinner, inviting Martins and a few close friends. Jane helped with the preparation, and for the first time, Philip noticed how seamlessly she fit into the household. She chatted easily with his mother, engaged with the guests, and of course never lost sight of Brian, who was passed around lovingly from guest to guest. "Philip, you're a lucky man," Martin said, pulling him aside as the evening went on. "Jane is really something. I can see how much she cares for Brian, and if I'm not mistaken, she's starting to care about you too." Philip waved him off. "Don't start with that, Martins. She's made it clear she's only here for Brian." Martins gave him a knowing look. "That may be true now, but feelings change, my friend. Just keep your eyes open." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Philip found Jane in the kitchen, tidying up. He offered to help, and as they walked side by side, he couldn't shake Martin's words away from his mind. "Jane," he began hesitantly, "I know you're only here for Brian, but I've realized something over the past few weeks." Jane looked up curious. "What's that?" Philip took a deep breath. "You've become more than just Brian's surrogate. You've become an important part of his life, and mine. And I don't want you to feel pressured, but I've developed feelings for you." Jane froze, her eyes widening slightly. She hadn't expected this. "Philip." "I know," he said quickly. "I don't want to make things awkward, but I had to be honest with you. I care about you, Jane, and I wanted you to know that." Jane was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Finally, she spoke. "Philip, I care about Brian deeply. I always will. But we have to be careful about blurring the lines. I don't want to complicate things any more than they already are." Philip nodded, his heart sinking a little. "I understand." As the weeks passed, Philip tried to respect Jane's boundaries, but his feelings for her only grew stronger. He found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't control, and though she remained focused on Brian, there were moments, small fleeting moments, when Philip thought he saw something in her eyes, a glimmer of affection she tried to hide. One afternoon, as Jane was preparing to leave for a few hours, Brian began to cry. Philip hurried over to comfort his son, but Brian wouldn't stop fussing. Jane turned back, taking Brian in her arms, and within moments he calmed down, resting his head against her shoulder. Philip watched in awe. "He really trusts you." Jane smiled, kissing the top of Brian's head. He's a special boy. Philip hesitated and said, Jane, I don't want you to go. I don't mean just for today. I mean for good. I think Brian needs you, and maybe so do I. Jane's heart raced as she looked at Philip, unsure of what to say. She had never expected this, a family, a home, and now the possibility of love. I need time to think, she whispered. Philip nodded, respecting her need and space. As the weeks went by, Philip and Jane found themselves spending more and more time together, and their connection grew stronger. At first, it was subtle, late night talk after Brian had fallen asleep, or quiet morning, sipping coffee while watching him play on the rug. The more they shared, the more Philip realized how much Jane had become part of his life. One evening, after a particularly long and stressful day at work, Philip found himself thinking about Jane as he drove home. Her smile, her gentle way with Brian, and the ease with which she handled everything had become his source of calm. He couldn't shake the feelings that he had developed over the past few months, so he decided to write her a note, a heartfelt message expressing everything he felt but had never said out loud. When he arrived home, Brian was already asleep and Jane was sitting in the living room reading a book. Philip felt a knot in his stomach when he handed her the note. What's this? She asked, looking up at him curiously. Just something I wanted you to read, Philip replied, his voice soft but filled with nervous energy. Jane smiled and opened the note. As she read through Philip's words, her heart began to race. In the note, Philip wrote about how grateful he was for everything Jane had done for Brian, and how she had brought joy and stability to both their lives, and how much he appreciated her. He admitted that he hadn't expected to fall for her, but now he couldn't imagine his life without her. Jane put down the note slowly, her emotions swelling. She looked at Philip, who was watching her nervously, waiting for a response. She took a deep breath before speaking. Philip, she began, her voice steady. I never expected this either. When I took on this role, I thought it was just a job, but it's become so much more. I've grown fond of Brian, and I've grown fond of you too. Philip's face lit up with relief and happiness. I wasn't sure how you felt, he said quietly. I didn't want to pressure you. Jane smiled, though there was still a hint of nervousness in her eyes. It's just, this is all so complicated. What if things don't work out? I don't want to hurt Brian or complicate things for him. Philip moved closer to her. I understand, he said softly. We don't have to rush into anything. I want to be careful too, but I believe that we can make this work together. We will take it one step at a time, and for Brian's sake, and for ours. Jane felt the tension ease from her body as she listened to Philip. His words were reassuring, and the care in his voice made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could navigate this together. Okay, she whispered, squeezing his hand. We'll take it slowly. From that night onward, the relationship between Jane and Philip changed. They didn't rush into anything physical or dramatic, but the understanding between them deepened. Their conversations became more intimate, filled with quiet moments of connection that felt more meaningful than before. Every morning, Philip would watch Jane as she cared for Brian, her laughter filling the house as she played with him. He found himself falling for her more each day, not just because of how well she cared for his son, but because of the person she was, kind, patient, and thoughtful. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch while Brian played in the yard, Philip turned to Jane and said, You've changed my life in ways I never expected. Jane looked at him too, her eyes softening. You've changed mine too, Philip. I didn't realize how much I needed this, a sense of belonging. They smiled at each other, understanding that their bond had grown into something special. But they kept their promise to take things slowly, making sure that Brian's happiness remained their top priority. Despite their growing affection for each other, both Philip and Jane were mindful of the delicate balance they needed to maintain. They didn't want to rush into the relationship so that it wouldn't complicate Brian's upbringing, but at the same time, they couldn't deny the strong connection between the both of them. Even Martins, who frequently visited, noticed the shift in their relationship. He would often tease Philip, but there was also genuine happiness in his voice. You two make a good team, Martins would say, clapping Philip on the back. I knew something like this would happen. I knew it. Philip would chuckle but never respond directly. He wanted to make sure that when the time came for him and Jane to move forward, it was at a pace that felt right for the both of them. As the weeks passed, Jane and Philip grew even more comfortable in their new dynamic. There was a palpable warmth between them, a closeness that went beyond co-parenting Brian. Martins, the ever-playful friend, couldn't resist teasing Philip when he noticed the change in his demeanor during one of their regular lunches. "You're glowing, Philip," Martins joked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "What's going on with you? Things seem to be going pretty well with Jane, huh?" Philip smiled, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, you could say that," he admitted. "We've been getting closer and we're taking it slow." Martins raised his glass with a knowing grin. "Here's to new beginnings. You deserve this, Philip. After everything with Lara, it's about time you found some real happiness." Philip chuckled and clinked glasses with his friend. It felt good to hear of those words, but the mention of Lara reminded him of the chaos she had caused. Though she had left after realizing she had no place in his life, her departure had been bitter, but she had left behind a cloud of tension, and the memory of her manipulation still bothered Philip. He couldn't let his guard down again. One evening, after a long day of work and parenting, Jane and Philip found themselves on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The cool night breeze swept over them, and the soft hum of the city felt distant and peaceful. Brian was already fast asleep, and the house was finally quiet. As they sat side by side, sipping tea, Philip turned to Jane, his expression serious yet tender. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I know we said we would take things slow, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. You've become such an important part of it. I don't want this to be temporary, Jane. I want us to be a real family." Jane's heart skipped a beat. She had dreamt of this moment, but hearing him say the words out loud made her nervous. Could they really take this step? Would it work out the way she hoped? "Philip, I want that too, more than anything. But are you sure? This is a big step. We've been through so much already, and I don't want to rush into something we are not fully ready for." Philip leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "I've never been more sure of anything. You, Brian, this life we're building together. It feels so right, and I'm ready for it. I'm ready to build a life with you, to be a real family. No more hesitation." "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do this." For the first time in a long while, Jane allowed herself to fully embrace happiness she felt. They had come a long way from the uncertain beginning when she had just been a surrogate. Now, she wasn't just part of Philip and Brian's life, she was becoming a part of their family. From that night forward, the shift in their relationship began more apparent. They began to make plans for their future, talking about how they would raise Brian together, what kind of home they wanted to build, and even discussing the possibility of having more children one day. Months passed and the bond between them grew even stronger. The day they decided to announce their relationship to the family was both nerve-wracking and exciting. Philip's mother had always been vocal about wanting him to settle down, so her reaction was one of joy and relief when she heard the news. "I knew this day would come," she exclaimed, her eyes twinkling as she hugged Jane. "We're perfect for each other, and look at Brian, he's already got the perfect parents." Jane smiled shyly, touched by the warmth and acceptance from Philip's mother. For the first time, she truly felt like she belonged. The three of them, Philip, Jane and Brian, began to feel more and more like a real family. When his first birthday arrived, it was a momentous occasion. They decided to host a small gathering with close friends and family to mark the special day. The celebration was intimate but filled with love. Brian was the center of attention, clapping his hands and giggling as his birthday cake was placed in front of him. Philip watched proudly as Jane helped Brian blow out the candles. For him, this was the culmination of everything he had hoped for, a family that felt complete. Jane and Philip's relationship continued to flourish. They were true parents in every sense of the word. They shared the joys and responsibilities of raising Brian, making important decisions about their future. One evening, after putting Brian to bed, Philip and Jane sat together in the living room. The room was filled with soft glow of fireplace, and everything felt peaceful and right. Philip looked over at Jane, her face illuminated by the flickering light, and in that moment, he knew what he wanted to do. "Jane," Philip began, You came into my life in the most unexpected way, but I can't imagine my life without you now. You've not only been an incredible mother to Brian, but you've shown me what true love means. Will you please do me the honor of being my wife?" Tears welled up in Jane's eyes as she smiled, barely able to contain her joy. "Yes, Philip, of course I'll marry you." They embraced, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. It was the start of a new chapter, one that would solidify the family they had built together. Their wedding was a simple affair, attended by those who knew and loved them, just close friends and family, the way they had wanted. Martins naturally stood by Philip's side as his best man. The ceremony was filled with heartfelt moments as Jane and Philip exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other for the rest of their lives. As they stood hand in hand, surrounded by people they cared about most, Philip couldn't help but feel grateful for the winding road that had led them to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and there had been unexpected twists along the way, but everything had fallen into place. After the wedding, they settled into a beautiful rhythm. Jane continued to be the loving, dedicated mother she had always been, and Philip embraced his role as a devoted father and husband. They worked together as a team, raising Brian in a home filled with laughter, love, and stability. Brian grew into a happy, confident child, surrounded by the security of his parents' love. In time, they began to talk about expanding their family. It was a conversation filled with excitement and hope for the future, but for now, they were content, enjoying every moment of the life they had built together. The moral lesson of this story is that true happiness and fulfillment come not from wealth or material success, but from love, family, and genuine relationships. It also teaches that life's plan can change in unexpected ways, and embracing those changes with an open heart can lead to deeper connection and happiness. Trust, patience, and the willingness to grow together are key to building a strong and loving family. Finally, the story highlights the importance of forgiveness, communication, and embracing the journey of life, no matter how unexpected it may be. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.